This week for Helm March, we'll focus on the heroes of Red Alert, the Allied powers of Europe. This alliance of European and North American nations was created out of necessity, with its sole focus being to oppose the Soviet invasion of Europe. In the early stages of the war, the Allied powers found itself on the immediate defensive as the Soviet Union's blitzkrieg took the continent by complete surprise. But as the war waged on in the Allied campaign, the Allies took to the offensive and moved on Russia in what will be known as the Great War. The Allied powers are introduced in this game as a group of European and North American nations created to react and counter the Soviet invasion of Europe. Its primary ideology is to resist Soviet aggression against all First and Second World nations and to uphold the ideals of the World Association of Nations Charter. I mentioned in the GDI overview last Hell March that the Global Defense Initiative was created as the official face of a covert group formed after the war depicted in this game. During one of the missions of the game, that group, Special Operations Group Echo Black Ops 9, is hinted at as a way to prevent anything like the Great War from occurring in the future. Obviously, it did not have the results that were hoped for. The Allied powers counts among its primary countries France, Germany, Great Britain, Greece, Spain, and Turkey, along with several smaller European nations. Later, the United States, Canada, and Australia joined the coalition, along with Soviet-invaded China. Most of the Allied funding and power capabilities were classified, but its enlisted strength was estimated to be around 3.4 million, in addition to 1.7 million guerrilla and resistance forces. As the Soviet military swept across Europe, all national political power on the continent collapsed, leaving the Allied powers as a parapolitical entity as well. At the end of the war, Europe's political apparatus consisted of Great Britain and the Allied military leadership. Due to its nature as an ad hoc defensive alliance, the Allied powers' war doctrine was based upon using whatever resources were available in whatever theater it was forced to fight in. In contrast to the heavily mobilized, fully mechanized Soviet war machine, the Allied powers relies upon much smaller, more maneuverable forces that allow for more unconventional fighting strategies. As the Allied campaign proceeds, the Allies gain greater capabilities and begin employing more advanced technologies. The Allied forces is headed by the Supreme Commander, General Gunther von Essling, who assigns all of your missions to you. Backing him up is his second-in-command, Greek General Nikos Stavros. While von Essling is the consummate professional, Stavros is much more animated and emotional, as particularly seen in the final cinematic. More on that later. Answering directly to von Essling is an American Special Forces agent, Tanya Adams, who carries out guerrilla raids and coordinates Black Ops missions. Finally, scientist Albert Einstein enters the war and works to produce weaponry for the Allies, culminating in his chronosphere device. The player character is never named and has not received one retroactively, but is known as Field Commander A9. Unlike the previous game, both the Allied and Soviet campaigns take place on the same continent, with the Soviets advancing and the Allies resisting and then counterattacking. As I stated earlier, the Allied campaign deals with them responding to the sudden attack and then quickly cobbling together some kind of counterattack. The opening missions consist of rescue missions, supply route disruptions, and depict a military faction clearly lacking in resources and personnel. The first features a rescue of Albert Einstein from a Soviet research facility, where his scientific prowess has been forcibly put into service, creating the Tesla coil defense system. In order to accomplish this task, Agent Tanya and a small contingent of soldiers is employed to cripple the base's power, get Einstein out of the base, and evacuate him by helicopter. Despite this success, the very next mission sees the Allied front still collapsing as supply lines falter and the Soviets prepare to move into Germany. The commander is sent in to clear out a vital supply route necessary to resupply the front and hold Germany. This mission is the first one where a base can be established and units produced. This mission is followed by one that requires Tanya to destroy bridges in a Soviet supply corridor, where the Soviets are attempting to counter the superior Allied tactics with more armored divisions. Despite all the commander's success, the Greek front collapses and Germany falls. Due to the destruction of the bridges in the previous mission, Soviet forces redirect through the pass that you took in the second mission. What's interesting about this mission is that it is a continuation of the theater from the second level, and your beginning base is whatever you were left with at the end of that mission. This continuity from one level to the next is a great addition to the series, raising the immersion experience of the gameplay. Due to the commander's efforts in this mission, Berlin remains in Allied hands, but Greece falls. This is followed by a rescue mission to save Tanya from a detention facility after she was captured trying to gain intel on a secret Soviet war project. With Tanya back in Allied hands, she provides her report and findings. The Soviets have a new defense mechanism, the Iron Curtain, which can be used to make any unit or building invulnerable for a period of time. The prototype has been deployed near the Aegean Sea, and the commander is tasked with destroying it, despite the heavy submarine presence in the area. After destroying the Iron Curtain, the Allies moved to cripple the Soviet sea strength in Denmark. With the Soviet offensive stymied, its technical research destroyed, and its naval strength broken, the commander is recalled for a vital mission. The Allies are working on its most advanced technology to date, the Chronosphere, a device that allows the movement of a single unit across the battlefield instantly by bending and manipulating time and space. Unfortunately, the Soviets have discovered the location of the research facility where it is being tested and needs to be protected. With the Iron Curtain destroyed and the Chronosphere research complete, it begins to look as though the tide of the war has turned. But Stalin has another trick up his sleeve. His scientists have discovered the key to atomic weaponry, and he intends to use it on several European cities. Due to this planned atrocity, a Soviet advisor has chosen to defect, and the commander must rescue him. From here, the commander must participate in a two-part mission. With the Allied success, Stalin has threatened to destroy 4 European cities. The commander is dispatched to destroy the nuclear facilities, but the mission ultimately fails and Stalin launches the missiles. This leads into the next mission, where a team of engineers must infiltrate the command center and disable the 4 missiles before they reach their target. This is another great game mechanic, where the time taken to complete the first mission directly impacts the time available for the next. The longer the first takes to complete, the less time you have to navigate the facility and deactivate the missiles. If you mismanage your time in the first mission, the second one can be truly nerve-wracking. As a matter of fact, in my initial playthrough of the game over a decade ago, I never finished this mission because of the time constraints I had inadvertently placed upon myself. From here on out, the Allies pressed their advantage against a quickly collapsing Soviet force, moving heavy naval forces through a choke point in the sea next to Russia, destroying the final version of the Iron Curtain, and entering a secret underground facility to make sure the Iron Curtain is never able to be constructed. This leads into the final mission, a push into Moscow. For this final mission, the Allied forces bring the full weight of the European war machine to bear against the Soviet capital, including Einstein's Chronosphere. The commander is told to spare no resource or effort in destroying the Soviets, but he is warned to be wary of any side effects resulting from using the unstable chrono technology too much. This is a long mission that requires the destruction of every Soviet structure and unit. While attempting to ferret out the Soviet forces, the Allied base is the target of near constant attacks, aerial strafes, and an atomic missile attack. With the final Soviet Union destroyed, the final cinematic begins. 3 soldiers are perusing the rubble of the Kremlin and enter a destroyed bunker. They find Stalin buried underneath the rubble with only his head uncovered. Acting on orders, they begin to move the rubble in order to arrest Stalin, but are interrupted by Stavros. He orders them away and, once alone, takes revenge on Stalin for his savage destruction of his home country. He shoves a rag into Stalin's mouth and covers his head with a large concrete slab, ensuring that no one will find Stalin until he is dead. This campaign, I think, has a more complex storyline than those found in the original Command and Conquer, with mission objectives stretching over multiple missions and things done in one mission impacting the map in a later mission. It's a nice evolution of the game design from one game to the next. The Allied arsenal is technologically advanced, but it does often lack in overall destructive force. Many times the Allies are the ones employing the weaker overall force on the battlefield, requiring the commanding officer to use specialized tactics to overcome in the battle. The Allies have 4 primary production structures: the tent barracks, the war factory, the helipad, and the naval yard. The rifle infantry and engineer are the basic infantry units belonging to both factions, but the Allies have the rocket soldier, medic, and spy to differentiate their enlisted forces. What's great about the Allied infantry is that the types of specialized troops available helps to inform the story. The Soviets have the 2 biggest tanks in the game and the far superior air force. So, the Allies employ soldiers that carry weapons designed to destroy armored vehicles and fire at airborne targets. The Allies are severely outnumbered, featuring an army of 3.4 million compared to the Soviet army at 14 million. So they use a medic to heal their soldiers and keep them in the battle for longer. The Soviets are the aggressor, bringing an almost insurmountable force to bear against Europe, so the Allies employ the spy to gather intel and give them whatever advantage they can. As far as vehicles go, the Allies have the Ranger Jeep to provide support for larger armored divisions or turn enemy infantry to mush. For long-range attacks, the Allies use the artillery to lay down heavy, if not entirely accurate, firepower. The Armored Personnel Carrier, or APC, returns from the previous game and allows the player to load 5 soldiers and quickly convey them around the map in a heavily armored vehicle. In order to counter the Soviet tank force, the Allies used the anti-tank mine layer to seed common choke points with explosives to cripple an enemy attack before it truly gets started. The Allies have 2 types of tanks available. The light tank is the workhorse of the Allied Armor Division, moving quickly and laying down admirable firepower. What it lacks in armor it makes up in its cheaper cost and increased maneuverability. When paired with the second Allied tank, the medium tank, they can be more useful. In a contracted battle, the medium tank will naturally attract more enemy attention, which its upgraded armor can take, and allow the light tanks to flank the enemy and deliver the killing blow. The Allies have a single aerial unit, the Apache Longbow, which can unleash a barrage of Hellfire missiles on ground-based targets. The Longbow is an excellent support craft, weakening enemy fortifications and disrupting enemy formations, when used along with land or sea units. However, the helicopter does less well on its own. The area where the Allies have a decided advantage is in its naval forces, employing 3 different naval vessels. The gunboat is the naval equivalent of the Ranger, light, fast, and lightly armored. The gunboat can lay down significant firepower when grouped together or with other vessels, but will not last long on its own. The second naval vessel of note is the destroyer, which acts as the basic tank of the sea, bringing more significant firepower and sacrificing a modicum of speed to do so. Still, it is the best all-around naval vessel, capable of hitting other naval vessels, aerial units, and land-based targets. Both the gunboat and the destroyer also use depth charges to destroy Soviet submarines. And finally, acting as the heavy tank of the sea is the cruiser, a ship employing long-range artillery cannons to bring devastating destruction to bear against Allied enemies. It does sacrifice speed and submarine countermeasures, so they should never be left alone. The Allies employ a number of technologies to even the significant battlefield imbalance. The first is a GPS satellite which will launch from the tech center and give its user a full look at the entire battlefield map. Further, if the commander can get a spy into the enemy subpen, it will activate the sonar pulse ability, showing the location of all enemy subs. The Allies have 3 basic defensive structures for its bases: the anti-infantry pillbox, which also comes in a camouflaged variety, the anti-tank turret, and the anti-aircraft AA gun. These structures once again help to inform us about the force division. The Soviet Union has a massive numerical advantage, heavy tanks, and a full arsenal of aircraft. So a machine gun equipped pillbox, a turret mounted cannon, and an aerial defensive weapon are crucial for survival. Finally, the Allies have the pinnacle of technological innovation, the chronosphere. The evolution of the Philadelphia experiment, the chronosphere allows for the movement of a single unit from part of the map to another instantaneously, bending time and space to the will of the commander. However, this experimental technology has its limitations, all of which were corrected and overcome in future game installments. The first is that it can only be used on a single vehicle unit, so the commander has to be innovative in using it effectively. If the device is used on infantry, it will kill them immediately. The second is that the unit will only remain in its new location for a brief period of time before reverting back to its original location. And the final problem with the chronosphere is that frequent use of the device will eventually result in the creation of a chronovortex or timequake somewhere on the map that can cause a great deal of damage. I like how the game designers crafted some drawbacks to what could be an overpowered weapon. The Allied weapons are limited and weaker, but they still allow for a capable commander to use them effectively on the battlefield against the Soviet Union. A word on continuity is needed here. Red Alert is considered to be a prequel to Command & Conquer and, as such, has a number of references and allusions to the original game. Weapons such as the Mammoth tank and references to the formation of a global defense agency all point to the coming game, taking place roughly 40 years later. Not to mention this guy, but More on him next time. All of this sets up nicely for this game to flow right into Tiberium Dawn, except for that pesky Red Alert 2. And don't even get me started on Red Alert 3. I won't turn this into a discussion of those games, we'll get to them at a future date, but I do think there's room here for discussion of the timeline, or at least part of it with the next part coming next week. This game is clearly set up as a prequel to Command & Conquer, but 4 years later Red Alert 2 was released and clearly does not fit into any of the Tiberium games. Up to that point, we clearly had an established timeline of Red Alert to Command & Conquer 1 to Tiberian Sun, but Red Alert 2 creates an inconsistency in the timeline. To reconcile the timeline, the fandom decided to go to the good old flex tape of storytelling just like another popular gaming series. Oh, I'll get there, just be patient. The solution was a multiverse, in which an Allied victory in Red Alert would lead to Red Alert 2, and a Soviet victory would lead to Tiberium Dawn. On the surface, this seems to reconcile all the disparities. Red Alert 2 clearly follows after an Allied victory, and something in the Soviet campaign references Command & Conquer, which we'll cover next week. Boom! Easy peasy lemon squeezy. Only, that doesn't work either. Nothing in Tiberium Dawn seems to come from a Soviet victory in World War II. This was primarily ignored for some time, but the definitive answer came when former game designer Adam Iskreen clarified that both Tiberium Dawn and Red Alert 2 follow after an Allied victory in Red Alert, meaning that some other discrepancy must explain the split. We'll discuss that when we do an in-depth review of Red Alert 2, but I thought it would be good to mention the situation here. I'll touch on some of these items again in the next video, but through the Soviet lens. Unlike with our review of GDI last Hell March, the Allied forces are the clear good guys in this game. The Soviets are the obvious aggressors, and the Allies are simply reacting and defending themselves from sure destruction. Despite all odds, the Allies successfully halt the Soviet advance and manage to beat it back to Moscow, killing Stalin and the taking of the capital. The resulting peace would last a while, but it was a false peace that would end in another war, larger and more ferocious than this one. Just as the seeds for our World War II were sown in the victor's response to the First World War, the next war depicted in Red Alert 2 would have its seeds planted in the Allies' response to this war. We will discuss those issues when we review Red Alert 2, but for now, rest easy. The good guys won. We'll continue Hell March next week with a similar breakdown and discussion of the Soviet Union. What's your favorite overall faction from any Command & Conquer game? Let me know down below.